They forgot who built systems like these. That line had been echoing in my head ever since my son, Ethan, showed up on my doorstep with that disarming smile. It wasn't the smile of a son longing for reconciliation. No, it was a smile of a salesman, hiding something sharp behind polished teeth. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I'm 63, a retired military engineer who's seen enough double crosses to recognize one before it's written on paper. I've dismantled devices designed to kill me in less time than it takes most men to lace their boots. But nothing prepared me for the look in my boy's eyes when he said, "Dad, let's start fresh. I want you to see something incredible." The incredible turned out to be a sprawling complex in the Nevada desert, a private playground for billionaires and Pentagon brass. They called it the Orbital Experience Simulator, a domed city of glass and steel where gravity could be switched off at will, where stars shone through high-definition projections, and where the illusion of space became more intoxicating than the real thing. Ethan had scored a VIP pass for me. He said it was an honor, a father and son adventure. But my instincts bristled the moment I noticed him tucking that badge into his pocket like contraband. I'd seen men hide weapons with less care. Inside, everything smelled of money, polished chrome, sterile air, and drinks that cost more than a week's pension. And there was Amber, too young for him, too polished, too calculating. She introduced herself with a voice that dripped honey but never reached her eyes. When she touched his arm, I saw how he leaned into her like a dog waiting for a command. We sat in the lounge, overlooking the simulator bay. Ethan poured me a drink. I caught the faintest hesitation in the way Amber's eyes darted toward the glass before she forced another smile. My fingers brushed the rim, and I thought about every debriefing room I'd ever sat in, every time a commanding officer had warned us. If something feels off, it probably is. So I set the drink down, untouched. Ethan laughed too loudly, trying to cover the silence. "Dad," he said, "you're going to love this. It'll feel like we're actually out there, floating among the stars." I looked at him carefully. His words were rehearsed. His hands were steady, but not his eyes. He avoided my gaze, staring instead at the reflection of himself in the glass wall. A man trying to convince himself as much as me. Amber leaned closer, whispering in his ear, but loud enough for me to catch. "Tonight's the main flight, right? The big show." Her tone wasn't about awe. It was about opportunity. And in that instant, something in me shifted. The years of retirement, of keeping my guard down, burned away. My son had invited me here not for reunion, but for something darker. I excused myself, walking down the corridor lined with silver panels and softly humming ventilation. Behind me, I caught a flicker of the reflection in the glass. Two conspirators, close, whispering. I palmed the VIP badge from Ethan's jacket earlier when he hugged me at the entrance. Old habits, old reflexes. He hadn't noticed. The badge glowed faintly in my hand now, a key into the heart of this illusion. As I stared at it, I realized the game had already begun, and I would not be the one caught unprepared. Because tonight, in their perfect little imitation of space, somebody was going to suffocate. The badge burned against my palm like a guilty secret. I slipped it into my pocket and returned to the lounge, masking my thoughts behind the same stoic calm that had carried me through a dozen war zones. Ethan was laughing too loud again, Amber leaning close, their body language tighter than siblings, colder than friends. I sat back down and picked up the glass I'd left untouched. The ice had melted into faint threads of water, and the liquid shimmer in the lounge's dim neon light. Amber's eyes flicked toward it again. Her attention betrayed her. She wasn't watching me. She was watching the drink. So I raised it slowly, let the rim brush my lips, and then, instead of swallowing, I let the taste rest on my tongue. A sweetness, chemical and sharp, like something masked in syrup. I let it linger only a second before I coughed lightly and set the glass down again. "Not bad," I said, lying through my teeth. Ethan smiled, too quick, too eager. "Knew you'd like it." He had no idea that I'd just confirmed my suspicion. Someone wanted me weak, dulled, compliant. But I hadn't made it through a lifetime of sabotage drills by ignoring the taste of poison. Later, while Ethan excused himself for a phone call, I followed. My joints creaked, but years of discipline kept my steps light. He walked to the far end of the corridor, where the glass walls gave a full view of the desert sunset. The orange glow painted him in silhouette. Phone pressed hard against his ear. I edged close enough to catch fragments. Yes. She's ready, no. Tonight, he won't see it coming. Then Amber's voice, muffled but audible, as she joined him. The investors are nervous, but once he's gone, everything's clear. We'll have the inheritance and the project. Inheritance. The word cut deeper than any blade. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was theft, betrayal wrapped in a smile. My son, my blood, plotting to erase me like a problem on a ledger. I pulled back before they saw me. My chest tightened, not from age, but from rage held under control. Back in my suite, I rinsed my mouth with water until the bitter tang was gone. Then I opened the small toolkit I always carried. Old habits die hard. Inside were miniaturized sensors, thermal readers, chemical detectors, fragments of the world I once built. They looked harmless, almost antique, but they'd kept me alive before. They'd do it again. I installed one behind a hydration system panel, in the simulator's prep bay, another in the vents near the lounge. If someone tampered with air, liquid, or wiring, I'd know. And I needed eyes. That's when I called Gregory, a detective I'd trusted once, long ago, when surveillance meant film reels instead of digital shadows. He owed me favors. More importantly, he hated corruption almost as much as I did. "Scott," he said when he picked up. His voice was dry gravel. "It's been years." "Not long enough." I replied, "I need you in Nevada. Tonight." He didn't ask why. Men like Gregory don't waste questions when tone alone carries the weight of truth. By the time I hung up, my sensors were already feeding data into my wrist unit. The reading spiked faintly near the lounge bar. Traces of alkaloids, poisons masked by alcohol. So they were serious. I stared at my reflection in the dark glass, the stars of projection flickering behind me. A father's face lined with years, with loss, with patience. A strategist's face sharpened by betrayal. They thought they were writing my ending. But endings are just beginnings in disguise. And tomorrow, when the so-called main flight began, I would not be their victim. No, tomorrow, the truth would start to bleed through, because I'd just set the trap. Gregory arrived just before midnight. I watched from my window as his old sedan rolled up the desert access road, headlights slicing through the dust. Most men his age moved on to golf clubs and fishing rods, but Gregory carried the same weary gravity he'd had in the service, eyes that had seen too much, posture that bent but never broke. When he stepped into my suite, he didn't waste time on greetings. He tossed a folder onto the desk between us. "You were right," he said. The folder smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old leather. Inside were stills, grainy shots pulled from surveillance feeds, a handheld camera, even one or two frame grabs from the complex's own security systems. Ethan and Amber, not father and son, not innocent companions. Lovers, plotters, whispering in corners, exchanging envelopes. In one image, Ethan kissed her temple as she slid a USB drive into his pocket. I stared at the photographs until my knuckles whitened against the desk. My boy, my blood, selling me out like I was a piece of property to be transferred. Gregory leaned back, studying me with his detective stillness. "They're planning more than a reconciliation, Scott. The investors want her assets tied to project. Amber's their link. Ethan's their knife." I closed the folder slowly, methodically. My hands did not shake, though my stomach twisted. I taught Ethan about loyalty, about duty, about honor. He twisted all of it into a weapon aimed at me. "They think they can stage an accident," Gregory continued. "An oxygen failure, maybe a system glitch. Make it look like the old man couldn't handle the thrill." I laughed short, cold, humorless. They forgot who built these systems. Gregory allowed himself the ghost of a grin. "So what's the play?" I rose, pacing to the glass wall, where the desert stars flickered in projection. Their light was false, but their symbolism was real enough. I tapped the pocket where Ethan's stolen VIP badge rested. "We let them think I'm asleep. We let them think they're in control. And then we turn their illusion into a trap of our own." Gregory nodded. I'll keep eyes on Amber. She's a weak link. And weak she was. Later, at the bar, I took a seat at the far end, half hidden by a chrome pillar, watching. Amber was laughing too loudly at something one of the investors said. She touched Ethan's hand under the table, quick, electric. She didn't notice me, but I noticed her. And I noticed the moment she slipped a small vial from her clutch, palming it with practiced ease before sliding it into her coat. When she excused herself, Gregory followed discreetly. He returned an hour later with a hard drive and a smirk. "Security footage," he said. "Amber in the prep bay, pouring powder into a hydration intake. She thinks she's clever." I felt a pulse of grim satisfaction. The game was moving faster now. Back in my suite, Gregory queued up the footage on my monitor. We watched in silence as Amber tipped the vial, tapped the panel closed, and walked away with the same smug confidence of someone who thought they owned the world. I leaned forward, pressing pause just as a reflection gleamed in the steel casing. The perfect symbol. The mask slipping in a mirrored surface. "She's setting the stage," Gregory muttered. "No," I said, my voice low, certain. "I'm setting the stage. She just doesn't know it yet." Outside, the desert night stretched vast and quiet. Tomorrow, the main flight. Tomorrow, their performance of the investors. And tomorrow, the moment their illusions began to crumble. I turned off the screen, letting the darkness swallow her face. My son's betrayal no longer cut, like a fresh wound. It hardened into something sharper. A blade I would wield myself. Morning in the desert always feels like a trick. The air is cold enough to bite, but the sun promises heat that will peel skin by noon. As I walked back toward the simulator complex, I felt that same duplicity in my bones. A world pretending to be one thing while hiding another. Inside, the staff bustled with quiet urgency. Today was a showcase, the main flight. Investors, military brass, and dignitaries had flown in overnight. They moved through the glass halls with the same smugness I'd seen in warlords and politicians alike. Everyone convinced they owned the stars. Ethan played the doting son. He handed me a fresh uniform, black, sleek, embroidered with the project's insignia. "Dad, you look like an astronaut up there." His grin was too wide, his eyes too shallow. Amber, beside him, adjusted her pearl earring, pretending not to watch me. But I caught a reflection in the mirrored wall. The tightness around her mouth. The calculation. She thought she had already won. I accepted the uniform, folding it neatly, as though I were grateful. Old soldiers know how to play roles. Later, in the prep bay, the truth revealed itself. Gregory's surveillance had been correct. Amber entered with her clutch, glancing over her shoulder before she crouched by the hydration system. The bay was empty except for us, she thought. I stood in the shadow of a bulkhead, listening to the faint rattle of powder against steel as she poured it into the intake line, a crystalline shimmer, vanishing into the tubes. She closed the panel quickly and wiped her hands on her skirt, her face taut with concentration. When she left, I stepped forward. The faint chemical scent tickled my nose. My sensors confirmed the spike. Lethal dose. Enough to kill a man slowly in zero gravity, where panic would look like natural failure. I unlatched the panel with practiced ease. The system was a cousin of ones I designed decades ago. Filters, tubes, connectors. She didn't know I could take it apart, blindfolded. I reversed the intake, swapped the tubing with a secondary line marked for Ethan's console. It was clean, seamless, invisible. To the untrained eye, nothing had changed. But in truth, the venom now waited for my son. I sealed the panel, wiped it smooth, and stood back. For a moment, I felt nothing but the steady rhythm of my pulse. The betrayal was complete. So was my answer. At dinner before the flight, Ethan raised a toast. "To my father," he said, glass aloft. "May he feel younger than ever when we float among the stars." The investors chuckled politely. Amber's hand lingered on his arm, her eyes bright with anticipation. I raised my glass of water, untouched, pure. "To new beginnings," I replied evenly. The words hung heavier than he knew. That night, I walked the halls alone. My reflection followed me in the glass walls, a man with silver hair, shoulders still squared, eyes hardened by choice. I had built systems to protect lives. Now I'd turned one against betrayal itself. In the silence, I thought of the boy Ethan had once been. The boy who begged me to teach him to ride a bike, who cried when he scraped his knee, who promised he'd make me proud. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man greedy enough to trade blood for profit. And tomorrow, when the simulated stars blaze overhead and the gravity bled away, he would drink his own poison. The desert sky outside was dark, a velvet canvas punctured by cold light. The real stars, untouched, eternal, they were watching. And I knew I was ready, because tomorrow my son would face the weight of his own choices. And the silence of space, real or simulated, would not forgive him. The morning of the flight, the complex pulsed with electricity. Staff in polished uniforms whispered into headsets. Investors strode to the corridors with champagne in hand, and military officers walked stiff-backed, cataloging every detail as if they already owned it. I suited up in the prep room. The sleek black uniform clung too tightly to my frame, but I carried it like armor. Across the room, Ethan adjusted his own suit, every movement exaggerated for the audience gathering behind the glass wall. He thrived under their eyes, always had. Amber stood with the investors, her smile practiced, her gaze flicking to the hydration console, like a stage director making sure her cue would land. She touched her pearl earring again, a nervous tick, though she thought it looked graceful. Ethan crossed the room with a theatrical flourish, a coiled tube in hand, the hydration line, the one Amber had prepared. He pressed into my palm as though it were a chalice. Here, Dad, for the ride. I met his eyes, steady, appreciated. My fingers wrapped around the tube. To him, it was a gesture of affection. To me, it was the moment the executioner offered his own noose. The guests applauded as we moved into the main simulator chamber. The dome arched high overhead, stars projected in dizzying clarity. The floor hummed beneath our boots, machinery awakening with a low, animal growl. Soon the illusion of gravity would vanish, and we'd float in their expensive imitation of the void. Ethan played the guide, leading me to my console. Just relax, he said loudly, so everyone could hear. You'll barely notice the transition. I strapped in, the hydration tube coiled neatly at my side. My pulse was steady, my breathing controlled. Years of training kept me calm. Across from me, Ethan basked in the spotlight, his grin wide, his gestures flamboyant. He thought he had orchestrated perfection. Amber clapped politely from the observation deck, leaning close to an investor, whispering something that made him smirk. They thought they were watching a triumph. They were, but not the one they expected. The chamber dimmed, the hum deepened, and then weightlessness. The floor dropped away from sensation. My body lifted, and for a moment, I floated. The guests gasped, delighted. Ethan laughed, pushing off a console to spin gracefully through the air, showing off. And then he took a long pull from his hydration line. The effect was not immediate. That was the beauty of their chosen poison. It began as a tightening of the throat, a subtle shortness of breath. He coughed once, brushed it off with a chuckle. Dry air, he said hoarsely. Try to keep performance alive. Amber's smile faltered. Her eyes flicked from him to me, back to him. The guests leaned closer to the glass, curious. Ethan swallowed again, his face reddening, the laughter catching in his throat. He clutched at his neck, kicking gently against the console, movements turning frantic. The chamber filled with his gasps. The sound of a man realizing he had lost control. I stayed still, floating with calm precision, my eyes locked on his. For the first time, he looked at me not as a father, not as prey, but as the man he had underestimated. The investors murmured. Someone tapped the glass. Is that part of the show? Amber rose from her seat, panic cracking her mask. Ethan, she called, voice sharp with fear. And in that moment, in front of them all, my son's performance shattered. The great orchestrator, choking on his own design. Ethan's cough turned into a ragged choke, his face contorting as he clawed at the hydration tube. The audience behind the glass shifted uneasily, their murmurs rising into a low rumble. What had been a spectacle of wonder was unraveling into chaos. Amber stood frozen for half a beat too long. Her painted smile cracked, her pearl earring trembling as her hand rose to cover her mouth. Then she bolted forward, palms slamming against the observation glass. Ethan, she shouted, her voice shrill enough to cut to the hum of the simulator. The investors looked at her, not him. Her panic was a mirror, reflecting guilt she hadn't meant to show. Their gazes sharpened, suspicious. Inside the chamber, Ethan spun slowly, weightless, kicking weakly against the air, his arms flailing. The illusion of control he had so carefully crafted disintegrated with every desperate gasp. He reached toward me, eyes wild, lips trembling around words he couldn't form. And I, calm, deliberate, unlatched my own hydration tube, held in my hands like a priest weighing scripture, and then clipped it neatly back in place. Untouched, safe. The contrast was damning. The old man, steady as stone. The young heir, unraveling like a child lost at sea. Amber's composure collapsed entirely. She turned to the investors, to the officers, her voice cracking. It wasn't me. This wasn't me, it was his plan. Her words came too fast, spilling out in a torrent. He said it had to look real, that it would clear the path, that... The gasps outside the glass grew sharper. They weren't watching an accident anymore. They were watching a confession. Ethan tried to shout, but only a guttural wheeze escaped. His eyes bulged with disbelief as he heard her betrayal. He tried to lunge toward the glass, but in zero gravity the movement sent him spinning awkwardly, a puppet tangled in his own strings. The officers muttered among themselves, their faces hardening. The investors drew back, their smiles gone, the sheen of their wealth powerless in the face of such spectacle. And Amber, cornered by her own panic, kept talking. I only helped because he said it was safe, that no one would know. It wasn't me. Her words were daggers, and each one drove deeper into Ethan's pride. I watched him flail, his legacy dissolving before an audience he had so carefully cultivated. Years of calculated arrogance undone in minutes. This was the first cut, the first public stripping of his illusion. But it was only the beginning. Because as the alarms finally began to wail, as technicians scrambled toward the bay doors, I pressed my palm against the glass and looked straight into Ethan's terrified eyes. And I let him see the truth, that this was not an accident. This was justice, written in silence and betrayal. The bay doors slammed open, red lights strobing across the chamber walls. Technicians in white rushed in, tethered to the rails, their movements sharp and frantic. They swarmed Ethan, restraining his thrashing limbs, shoving an oxygen mask over his face. His muffled cries echoed through the chamber, a grotesque symphony of panic. I drifted back against the console, arms folded, letting the scene unfold. I didn't need to fight for attention. Ethan was giving me everything I needed. His downfall was writing itself in front of an audience of power brokers. From the observation deck, Amber kept babbling, clawing at the sleeve of a general who had gone pale. It wasn't me, I swear. He planned it. He said his father would never survive the flight, that we'd take everything and no one would question it. Her words carried through the intercom. Clear, inescapable. The investors recoiled. The officers exchanged looks that said more than words. Liability, scandal, disgrace. Gregory was waiting when I stepped out of the decontamination corridor. He leaned against a pillar, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Quite a show, he muttered. I brushed past him, my gaze locked on the gathering crowd. Officers demanding answers. Investors huddled together, whispering with clenched jaws. Ethan, strapped to a stretcher, oxygen mask fogging with every ragged breath. He tried to tear it off, his voice muffled but desperate. It was her. She set me up. Amber's face twisted, her earlier mask shattered. She snapped back, shrill. Don't you dare put this on me, Ethan. You said your father was too blind to see. The crowd erupted with overlapping voices, accusations spiraling. And I, the supposed victim, walked into the center of it with measured steps, my uniform still pristine, my composure unshaken. I raised my hand once, a simple gesture. The voices stilled. Soldiers learn early how silence can be commanded. Old instincts never fade. My son invited me here. I said evenly, my voice carrying across the hall. He spoke of reconciliation. Instead, he handed me a poison line, believing I would choke to death in front of you. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan shook his head violently, eyes wide above the mask. Amber shrank back, cornered by her own panic. Gregory stepped forward, lifting a small case. He snapped it open with a deliberate click. Inside, a portable console blinked to life. "We have more than words," he said. The screen lit with footage. Amber in the prep bay, pouring the vial into the hydration system. Ethan meeting her in a corridor, whispering promises, his hand on her back. A timestamp glared in the corner, last night. The investors leaned in, their faces hardening. The officers muttered into radios. The evidence was irrefutable. Ethan tried to lunge on the stretcher, but the technicians pinned him down. His muffled roar of denial was drowned out by the hum of the playback. For the first time in years, I felt no weight in my chest. Just clarity. This was the second cut. The second humiliation. The boy who thought he could play God in a cage of false stars was now nothing more than a man stripped bare, his conspiracies laid out like evidence on a cold slab. And yet, I knew it still wasn't enough. Not until the entire world saw him fall. The debrief room smelled of recycled air and nervous sweat. A long table gleamed under fluorescent lights, surrounded by men and women who had spent their lives commanding armies or empires of capital. They weren't accustomed to chaos, but Ethan and Amber had delivered it straight into their laps. I sat at the far end, posture straight, uniform crisp. Beside me, Gregory positioned the portable console. Its screen still froze on the image of Amber's reflection in the steel panel, the vial tipped in her hand. A single frame of betrayal, permanent and undeniable. Ethan sat opposite, his face pale, his hair damp with sweat. The oxygen mask dangled around his neck, forgotten. He tried to hold himself tall, but the straps of restraint on the stretcher had left red lines on his wrists. The illusion of power had left him. He looked like a boy caught in his own lie. Amber, cornered against the wall, wouldn't meet his eyes. She had collapsed into herself, arms folded tight, pearls crooked on her ears. A general spoke first, voice sharp as a rifle crack. "Explain this." He jabbed a finger at the frozen frame on the screen. Amber broke instantly. "It wasn't my idea. It was his." She pointed a trembling hand at Ethan. "He said his father wouldn't survive, that the inheritance would clear to us. I was just following his instructions." Murmurs rippled around the table. Investors leaned back in their chairs, their faces carved from stone. Ethan's composure finally shattered. He slammed his fist on the table, voice ragged. "She's lying. She was the one who pushed it. She seduced me into this. She made me." The general's hand rose, silencing him. His gaze shifted to me. "And you, Mr. Caldwell?" I looked around the room, letting my silence carry weight before I spoke. My son underestimated me. He believed age had dulled my senses. But I recognized the signs. I tasted the poison. And I remembered I built these systems. I know their bones better than anyone. I leaned forward, eyes never leaving Ethan's. So I switched the lines. The poison he intended for me, he drank himself. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan's face crumpled, his bravado disintegrating under the weight of truth. He tried to shout again, but no one listened. All eyes were on me. The survivor, the strategist, the man who had turned betrayal back on itself. Gregory pressed a button and the footage rolled. Ethan whispering to Amber in the corridor. "He won't see it coming." Amber replying, "Once he's gone, it's all ours." Their voices echoed in the sterile room, damning them more than any testimony could. The investors shifted uncomfortably. One of them muttered, "We can't be associated with this." Another whispered, "Pull out, cut losses." The officers exchanged glances, the kind that ended careers. Amber buried her face in her hands. Ethan's lips moved soundlessly, pleading, cursing, praying. No one could tell. And me? I sat silent, letting the weight of their collapse settle across the room. This was the third cut, the final public humiliation. But even as I watched them crumble, I knew my work wasn't done. Exposure wasn't enough. Not yet. The inheritance, the assets, the legacy he thought he could steal. That was the battlefield still waiting. And I would decide where it all landed, because justice without consequence is just theater. And I was writing something far more permanent. The debrief dissolved into chaos, but my mind was already moving beyond the room. Exposure had cut them down, yes, but exposure alone doesn't finish a war. If I had learned anything in my years designing systems for battle, it was this. You don't stop when the enemy is wounded. You stop when the structure holding them up collapses entirely. That structure, for Ethan, was wealth. My wealth. After the meeting, I walked through the quiet corridors, the simulated stars winking overhead like indifferent witnesses. Gregory trailed beside me, his steps slow, deliberate. "You've got them cornered," he said. "The world will eat them alive once this footage spreads." "It's not enough," I replied. "They built this entire scheme around one thing, money. If I leave it, even a shred, they'll find a way to crawl back." Gregory studied me with that old detective calm. "So what's your move?" We stepped into the observation deck, now empty, the glass still faintly fogged from the investor's breath earlier. I looked out at the desert dawn breaking across the horizon, streaks of crimson and gold painting the sand. It was the first real light I'd seen since arriving, unfiltered, unprojected, undeniable. "I transfer everything," I said. "Not to him, not to her, to people who will never betray me." Gregory raised a brow. "Veterans." I nodded. "Men and women who carried burdens no one else would. They deserve more than a whisper of thanks. They'll have it all. The estate, the shares, the land." His lips curved into the faintest smile. "That'll cut deeper than any poison." When I returned to my suite, I opened the secured terminal built into the desk. Old habits die hard. I never traveled without access codes buried in places no one could imagine. Ethan had thought me blind, too old to understand technology. He'd forgotten who wrote the manuals he pretended to read. The terminal blinked to life under my fingerprints. Within minutes, the documents began to shift. Trusts restructured, assets redirected. The inheritance that Ethan had plotted over like a dragon with his hoard now streamed into a foundation for veterans' housing, medical care, education. Every line of code a nail in his coffin. As the transfers finalized, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, but release. The weight of years of doubts, of second-guessing my place in the world after service, began to lift. My legacy would no longer rot in the hands of betrayal. It would build something that endured. And yet, even as the relief settled in, I knew the storm wasn't over. Ethan would fight like a cornered animal once he discovered what I'd done. Amber would cling to him or abandon him, whichever suited her panic best. That was fine, because I was ready for the last act. The desert sky outside shifted from crimson to gold. The real stars faded, but their truth remained. Ethan had tried to erase me inside an illusion of space. Now I would erase him in the clarity of daylight. The news reached him faster than I anticipated. Money moves quicker than gossip, and by the time the investors had boarded their jets, Ethan stormed into my suite, eyes bloodshot, shirt wrinkled, rage spilling out like a dam burst. "You think this is over?" he spat, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. "You think you can humiliate me in front of generals and billionaires, then steal what's mine?" I didn't rise from the chair. I let him pace like a rabid dog. His words revealed more than he intended. Steal what's mine. He didn't say father, didn't say legacy. He said possession. "You built nothing," I replied evenly. "You tried to burn down what I gave you, and now it belongs to people who won't waste it." His face twisted, veins bulging at his temple. "Veterans? Old ghosts? You'd rather hand it to strangers than your own son." My son died the day he decided money was worth more than blood. The word struck him harder than any fist. His jaw slackened, then clenched tight, a storm of fury and disbelief. For a flicker, I saw the boy he once was, the boy I had carried on my shoulders, begging me to point out consolations. And then that boy was gone, replaced by the man before me, a predator robbed of prey. Amber slipped in quietly behind him. Her eyes darted between us, calculating angles. When she saw the cold finality in my gaze, she shifted closer to Ethan, whispering, "We can still fix this. The investors don't have to see the documents. We can spin it, make it look like." "Shut up." Ethan roared, shoving her back against the wall. She gasped, more startled than hurt, and for the first time her eyes betrayed something real fear. He turned on me again, pointing a trembling finger. "I'll destroy you for this. If you think a few signatures erase me, you're wrong. I'll find a way back." I always do. I stood slowly, meeting his height with the calm of a man who no longer feared the storm. You had a chance to start over. You chose greed. Now you'll choke on it, whether here or out there. His chest heaved. Amber clutched his arm, pleading softly, "Ethan, stop, please." But he wasn't listening anymore. He was spiraling, rage-devouring reason. He lunged across the room, hands outstretched, aiming for my throat. Old reflexes woke inside me. I sidestepped, gripped his wrist, twisted, and sent him crashing into the desk with a thud that rattled the terminal. He groaned, but the fire in his eyes didn't dim. If anything, it burned brighter. Gregory entered then, gun holstered but hand ready. He didn't need to draw. His voice alone froze the air. Enough. The officers already have the footage. The investors have the contracts. The only thing you can salvage now is silence. Ethan looked up from the floor, chest heaving, sweat dripping. Silence was not in him. And in that moment I realized this was the edge. The last breath before the storm broke fully. Because a man with nothing left to lose will always choose destruction. And my son had just stepped into that shadow. There's a moment in every operation when you can feel the temperature drop, not in the air, but in the soul of the room. That was the moment I saw in Ethan's eyes as he staggered up from the desk, sweat shining on his forehead, pupils blown wide with madness. He was past reason, past pride. He was running on the fumes of desperation. "You think you won?" he rasped, clutching the edge of the terminal. His voice cracked, but his rage sharpened it. "You think paperwork and cameras can bury me? No, old man. If I go down, I'm taking you with me." Amber whispered something sharp, frantic, but he shoved her aside again. Her shoulder struck the glass wall with a hollow thud. She gasped, clutching herself, her mask finally gone, just a frightened accomplice who realized too late she'd picked the wrong devil. Ethan's hand darted to the terminal, fingers flying with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this in secret. Alarm shrieked immediately. On the monitor, the simulator status blinked red, systems unlocking one by one. He wasn't just tampering with records. He was triggering the damn machine. "You'll die here," he screamed, spittle flying. "We'll all die, and they'll never know who to blame." Gregory lunged for him, but Ethan slammed the security override. The doors clamped shut with a hiss, sealing us inside. Red lights painted the room, an artificial heartbeat pounding through the walls. I stepped forward, steady despite the chaos. "Ethan, stop this. You don't understand what you're opening." He laughed, a jagged sound. "Don't lecture me. I grew up watching you worship these systems, watching you care more about machines than me. Well, now the machine's mine, and it'll write the ending you deserve." The floor trembled. The simulator bay roared to life, engines cycling, gravity modulators whining. Even through the walls, the vibrations crawled into my bones. He had activated a full sequence with no safety checks. If it reached full power, the dome would tear itself apart, sucking everyone inside into a maelstrom of broken steel and fire. Amber clutched the wall, screaming at him, "Ethan, you'll kill us all." His face twisted. Better that than letting him win. His finger hovered over the final command, veins bulging in his neck. Gregory drew his pistol at last, voice like steel. "One more keystroke, and I'll put you down." Ethan met his eyes, then mine. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. The air seemed to collapse inward, thick with inevitability. And then Ethan slammed the key. The entire complex shuddered, as though the desert itself were trying to shake us off its back. Sirens wailed, lights strobed. Somewhere far below, the sound of tearing metal echoed like thunder. Gregory grabbed Amber, dragging her toward cover. I stood rooted, watching my son, the man I had raised, the man who now sought to kill me, not out of strategy, but out of spite. This was the abyss, the point where fathers bury sons, or sons bury fathers. And in that instant, I realized only one of us would walk out of this machine alive. The roar of the simulator swallowed every human sound. Steel screamed as modulators overloaded, panels rattling loose from their mounts. The dome's projected stars fractured, stuttering like broken glass across the ceiling. The illusion of space had become a death trap. I staggered against the vibration, bracing a hand on the wall. Amber cowered in the corner, shrieking with every thunderous groan. Gregory fired a warning shot past Ethan's head, but my son didn't even flinch. He was consumed, eyes wild, sweat streaking his face. This is how it ends. Ethan bellowed, gripping the console like a mad preacher at a pulpit. You won't take my life from me, old man. I'll end it on my terms. His voice was nearly drowned by the alarms. Sparks rained from the ceiling, acrid smoke filling the air. Somewhere deep within the structure, a containment lock failed with a bone-shaking boom. The chamber lurched, gravity shifted and collapsed. We were thrown into a chaos of weightlessness, debris floating around us like shrapnel frozen mid-flight. Ethan laughed, high, manic, unhinged. He pushed himself off the console, drifting toward me with outstretched hands. You always thought you were better, smarter, but you'll die gasping in the dark like anyone else. I steadied myself, decades of training rising like muscle memory. My body remembered zero-G drills from a lifetime ago. I grabbed a floating panel, kicked off the wall, and met in midair. Our bodies collided, spinning in slow, violent rotation. His fists flew clumsy, wild. Mine struck with precision, controlled, efficient. We tumbled through floating debris, slamming into a railing. He grunted, blood from a split lip drifting in crimson droplets. He snarled, "You should have stayed in the grave with your glory days." I twisted his wrist, forcing his hand away from the console device strapped to him. His veins bulged as he fought back. But rage is a poor substitute for discipline. I pinned him against the wall, his face inches from mine. You want to control, Ethan? This is what it feels like when you've lost it. Behind us, Gregory shouted, "Scott, the dome's integrity is failing. We've got minutes before it tears apart." Amber screamed, clutching the railing as glass panels cracked overhead. One fissure spread like lightning across the dome, stars splitting into shards of light. The desert sun seeped through, real and merciless, burning away the illusion. Ethan twisted violently, wrenching free. He slammed an elbow into my ribs, forcing air from my lungs. Then he kicked off, floating back toward the console, his hand reaching for the final override switch, one command that would collapse the entire system into catastrophic failure. Gregory raised his pistol again, but debris slammed into his arm, knocking it wide. Amber wailed, "Stop him. He'll kill us all." I launched forward, grabbing a loose tether, pulling myself like a slingshot through the air. Ethan's fingers brushed the switch centimeters away. And in that frozen second, as smoke, sparks, and fractured stars filled the chamber, time slowed. It was no longer about inheritance or wealth or pride. It was about blood. My blood, his blood. A father and son, caught between the void and the truth neither could escape. I stretched my hand, closing the distance, knowing one truth above all others. If I didn't stop him now, there wouldn't be a final act. There would only be silence. I slammed into him just as his hand reached the override. The impact sent us both spinning across the chamber, a storm of sparks and floating debris wrapping around us like shrapnel caught in slow motion. His fingers grazed a switch but missed. The console flickered with warning lights, systems groaning in protest, yet the final command remained untouched. Ethan howled, rage tearing through his voice. "You can't stop me. You've stolen everything. His fist pummeled against my arms and chest, wild and furious, but I locked onto his wrist, forcing it away from controls. Everything. I growled through clenched teeth. What you tried to steal was never yours. It was trust. It was family. And you burned it to ashes." He spat blood into the weightless air, droplets scattering like tiny planets drifting between us. His eyes blazed, not with shame, not with grief, but with the stubborn pride of a man who'd rather destroy the world than admit he'd lost. We smashed into a railing, the metal groaning under our weight. I pinned him there, the vibrations of the failing dome thrumming through us both. The crack in the glass ceiling widened, sunlight spearing through the fractured stars. Reality intruded with merciless clarity. Amber clung to the far wall, tears streaking her makeup, her voice shrill and desperate. "Ethan, stop. You'll kill us. You'll kill yourself." But he didn't even glance at her. His gaze locked on mine, as if the rest of the world had ceased to exist. "Better dead than humiliated by you," he hissed. "You humiliated yourself," I answered coldly. His body surged with one last desperate burst of strength. He shoved hard, wrenching free of my grip, twisting toward the console again. For an instant, he was inches from it, his hand clawing at the final switch, the veins in his neck straining. And an instinct took me. I grabbed the tether line at my belt and snapped it around his arm. With a violent pull, I yanked him backward. His body spun out, slamming against a floating support beam. The air fled his lungs in a single strangled gasp. He floated there, tethered, caught between me and the machine he had tried to control. His chest heaved, his face pale and slick with sweat. And still, he tried to reach the console, fingers stretching like a drowning man grasping for air. The dome screamed louder, fissures racing across the glass. A section buckled, spraying shards into the void between us. The desert sun now poured in unhindered, burning away the last fragment of illusion. The stars on the projector flickered and died. For a moment, father and son hung there in silence, two shadows caught in a world collapsing around them. Gregory's voice cut through the chaos, harsh and urgent. "Scott, end it. He'll never stop." Amber sobbed, clutching her pearls, whispering, "Please, please, don't let it kill us all." Ethan's eyes locked with mine, not pleading, not apologizing, defiant even in the face of death. He would drag me down until the last breath, until nothing remained. And I understood then the boy I had raised was long gone. All that was left was this man, hollowed out by greed and pride, willing to turn the sky itself into a weapon. The tether line creaked in my grip. His body twisted, fighting, desperate for the console. It was time to decide. Not as an engineer, not as a strategist, but as a father who had reached the end of forgiveness. The tether strained in my grip, every fiber stretched to its limit as Ethan thrashed against it. His breath came in ragged gulps, his face red with exertion, veins pulsing at his temples. He wasn't fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for pride, for the illusion that he still controlled something in this collapsing world. "Let me go," he roared, spittle flying, eyes blazing with fury that stripped him of humanity. "I'd rather burn this place down than live in your shadow." My voice was steady, cold as steel. "Then burn alone." I tightened the tether and yanked, dragging him away from the console once more. He screamed, clawing at the air, fingernails scraping metal as he flailed. For a brief instant his expression cracked, not rage, but fear, pure and raw. The mask slipped. I saw the boy again, the one who used to beg me to point out Orion in the night sky. But it was a ghost, gone as soon as it appeared. The dome groaned violently, fissure spiderwebbing overhead. Panels snapped free, tumbling weightless, sparks fountaining into the chamber. Outside, the desert sun blazed, blinding and merciless, tearing apart the illusion of stars. Amber shrieked as another crack split across the glass, her hands covering her face. Gregory shouted, "Scott, we're seconds from collapse. Make the call." I pulled Ethan close, tether biting deep into his arm. He writhed like a trapped animal, teeth bared, eyes wild. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll regret ever crossing me." "I already regret what you became," I whispered back. And then I made my choice. With a single motion, I unclipped my end of the tether and shoved him hard into the void of the chamber. He spun out, tethered only by the line wound tight around his wrist, flailing helplessly as he smashed into support beam. The crack of bone echoed through the chamber, a sound that cut deeper than any words. He howled, clutching his arm, spinning weightless, powerless. The once proud orchestrator of betrayal, reduced to a broken man flailing in the dark. I turned back to the console, overriding his commands with rapid precision. Fingers flew across the controls, decades of training guiding me through the failing system. Warning alarms still screamed, but the catastrophic sequence slowed, red lights dimming to amber. The dome's collapse had been delayed, not stopped, but bought enough time to survive. Ethan dangled in the air behind me, tether twisting, his voice breaking into hoarse cries. "You can't do this to me. I'm your son. Blood doesn't turn its back on blood." I looked at him over my shoulder, my chest heavy with the weight of truth. "You turned your back the moment you chose greed over family. Blood doesn't excuse betrayal." Amber sobbed from the corner, her voice thin, broken. "He'll never stop, Scott. He'll never stop until he takes you with him." Gregory's pistol was steady now, trained on Ethan. Then this ends today, he growled. The dome shuddered again, cracks widening, sunlight pouring in like fire through the broken glass. Ethan's eyes met mine, filled with a hatred so deep eclipsed fear. Even in pain, even stripped bare, he clung to it. And I knew, whatever came next would not just decide the fate of this place. It would decide whether my son left this world as a man destroyed by his own choices, or as a danger that had to be cut away entirely. The chamber groaned. The tether creaked. My heart pounded once, heavy and final. It was time. The chamber was a furnace of chaos. Sparks poured like molten rain. Steel beams groaned as the dome threatened to collapse. Sunlight blazed through jagged fractures, slicing the darkness into shards of fire. My son dangled in the weightless void, tethered, broken, but still glaring at me with a hatred that had become his only compass. "Cut me loose and fight me like a man," he roared, spittle flecking his lips. His injured arm hung useless, blood beating and drifting in crimson globes around him. Or are you too much of a coward to finish what you started? Gregory's pistol never wavered. Amber pressed herself against the wall, sobbing, whispering prayers to gods she had long forgotten. The whole place was unraveling, yet all I saw was Ethan's face. So much of me in his jawline, in his eyes, but twisted, warped, poisoned. "You're not asking for a fight," I said quietly, my voice carrying above the alarms. "You're begging for someone else to take responsibility for your ruin. You've been doing that your entire life." His laugh was broken, wild. "Better ruin than nothing. Better ashes than living in your shadow." I felt the tether bite into my palm, the cord trembling with his every jerk and thrash. For a moment, I hesitated, not out of weakness, but out of memory. The boy who once sat beside me in the desert, pointing at the night sky, asking, "Is that one ours? Will we ever touch it?" But that boy was gone. This man had buried him. I leaned closer, my voice sharp as a blade. "You wanted to own the stars, but you never understood. You can't own what you're too small to respect." His snarl twisted into something raw. Desperation, rage, fear. "You think they'll remember you, old man? They'll remember me. I'll make them." "No," I said, my hand tightening around the tether. "They'll remember you for what you truly were." The dome groaned one final time, a fissure snapping across its ceiling like a gunshot. Real desert air screamed into the chamber, sand whipping through the cracks, carrying the scent of truth, dry, sharp, undeniable. Ethan's eyes widened, realization dawning. For the first time, he looked afraid, not of death, but of erasure. Gregory called out, voice hard as iron, "Scott, end it." Amber whimpered, "Please?" The alarms howled. The tether creaked. I looked into my son's eyes, not as a soldier, not as an engineer, but as a father who had given his last ounce of forgiveness. And then I made the cut. The tether snapped free from my hand. Ethan spun into the collapsing chamber, weightless, powerless, his scream swallowed by the roar of failing machinery. He clawed at the air, reaching for a console, a beam, anything, but found nothing. For a moment, he was suspended against a blaze of desert light pouring through the fractured dome. His silhouette burned there, a false star falling. Then he was gone, swallowed by the chaos, a man undone by his own ambition. The chamber steadied briefly as my override took hold, systems locking into emergency shutdown. The alarm softened, though the dome still cracked and wept sunlight. Silence followed. Heavy, immense. Gregory lowered his pistol. Amber slid to the floor, sobbing. I stood alone in the center, my hands empty, the tether gone. A father, a soldier, a man who had just buried his son, not in earth, but in truth. And though the noise had stopped, the weight of it pressed harder than any machine ever could. The silence after collapse is never true silence. It is a groan of settling steel, the hiss of vents releasing, the faint echo of what almost was. As the dome bled its last projections into darkness, I floated still, tether gone from my hand. Ethan was no longer there, not as a threat, not as a son, not even as a shadow. Just absence. The machine that had promised him glory became his tomb, and no amount of rage or pride could drag him back from it. Amber curled against the wall, sobbing softly, her pearl earring cracked and dangling. She had played her role, and when the curtain fell, she was left with nothing but guilt. Gregory didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me, waiting, always the observer, the witness. The systems eased into full shutdown, leaving only emergency lights. The illusion of space was gone. No stars overhead, no velvet void. Just fractured glass, sunlight burning through, the desert outside real, unyielding, eternal. We made our way out through the emergency hatch, stumbling into the cool air dawn. Sand crunched beneath my boots, rail gravity pulling every step into certainty. For the first time in days, I felt the ground, solid and honest, beneath me. Gregory lit a cigarette, exhaling with the calm of a man who had seen endings before. "It's done," he said simply. Amber was escorted away by officers, her protest thin and hollow. She would live, but she would never escape the stain of her betrayal. That was her prison, and it would follow her longer than any bars could. As for Ethan, no one asked where he was. They all knew. I stood alone at the edge of the desert, the horizon painted with fire. My uniform was torn, my body aching, but I had never felt more awake. The inheritance was gone from his grasp, redirected to men and women who would turn into homes, into healing, into life. My legacy would not rot in a single man's greed. It would grow. I reached into my pocket, pulling free the stolen VIP badge, the same one he had tucked away so carefully, thinking it gave him power. I turned it over in my hand, the metal catching the dawn. It was nothing now, just a trinket, a dead symbol of a false world. I let it fall into the sand. The desert swallowed it whole. And then I lifted my eyes. The sky stretched endless above me, stars fading in the wash of morning, but still there, untouchable, eternal. Not projections, not illusions, the real thing. Once, long ago, my son had asked me if they belonged to us, and I had told him no. They belong to no one. They are simply there, waiting, reminding us how small we are. Now I understood the weight of those words more than ever. I had not won wealth. I had not won glory. I had won something rarer. Clarity. The knowledge that betrayal could not define me, that revenge was not only destruction, it was the restoration of truth. The desert wind carried the first warmth of day across my face. I closed my eyes, breathing it in, and when I opened them I let the stars go, because in the end, they had never been mine to hold. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.